Chapter 1. Conviction of Sin. The Christian Pilgrimage. Walking through the desert of this world, I came to a certain place where there was a cave, where I lay down to sleep and had a dream. In my dream I saw a man standing, dressed in rags and with his back to his house. He had a book in his hands and a heavy load on his shoulders. I saw him open the book and read it, and while she read she cried and trembled. Psalm 38 verse 4. Isaiah chapter 64 verse 6. Luke chapter 14 verse 33. Hebrews chapter 2 verse 2 and 3. And unable to contain himself, he cried out in despair, saying, "What should I do?" Acts of the Apostles chapter 2 verse 37. In this lamentable state, he returned home, trying to hide his grief so that his wife and children would not notice. But he could not keep silent for long, because his suffering worsened. At last he said, "O my dear wife, and you, children of my heart, I am afflicted because of a burden that overwhelms me. Also, I know in good faith that this city of ours will be burned with fire from heaven. We will all die in it if we don't find some way to escape, which I still don't perceive." Her family was stunned, not because they believed what she told them, but because they thought she was having a panic attack. The night advanced, and they hoped that sleep would calm his brain, so they hurried to put him to bed. But the night was as harrowing as the day, and instead of sleeping, he spent it crying and moaning. When dawn came, they asked him how he felt and he replied, "I feel worse." He began to speak to them again, but they began to harden. It seemed to them that treating him harshly and in a bad mood would make him react. Sometimes they teased him, sometimes they scolded him, and sometimes they ignored him. For this reason, he retired to his room to cry his unhappiness. He would go to the field to pray for them with regret, and also to alleviate his own suffering. He walked alone through the fields, sometimes reading, and sometimes praying. And so the days went by. Evangelist provides direction. Once, as he was walking in the field, as he often did, reading his book, and in great distress, he cried out as he had done before, saying, "What shall I do to be saved?" Acts of the Apostles chapter 16 verses 30 and 31. I also saw that he was looking to one side and to the other, as if to start running, but not knowing which course to take, she stayed where she was. Then I saw a man called Evangelist approach him, who asked him, "Why are you crying?" He answered, "Lord, I see by the book that I have in my hand, that I am condemned to die and that later I will be judged." Hebrews chapter 9 verse 27. I do not want the first. Job chapter 14 verses 21 and 22, and I am not prepared for the second. Ezekiel chapter 22 verse 14. Why don't you want to die since so many evils persecute you? The man answered, "Because I fear that the burden that I carry on my shoulders will sink me deeper into the grave." If such is your state, answered Evangelist, why do you stand around doing nothing? Because I don't know where to go, he answered. Then, Evangelist, pointing to a very spacious plain, said to him, "Do you see that narrow door in the distance?" Matthew chapter 7 verse 14. Can't you see the glow of a light in the distance? Psalm 119 verse 105. Second letter of Peter chapter 1 verse 19. I think so. Then he said to him, Evangelist, do not lose sight of that light. Go straight towards it and you will see the door that, when you knock, it will open and you will be told what to do. And I saw in my dream that the man began to run, But he had not gone far when his wife and his children, upon seeing him, began to cry out, begging him to return. Luke chapter 14 verse 26. But the man covered his ears and kept running, exclaiming, "Life! Life! Eternal life!" Without looking back, he kept running towards the center of the plain. Genesis chapter 19 verse 17. Unfriendly neighbors, stubborn, and flexible. The neighbors also came out to see him run, and some made fun. Jeremiah chapter 20 verse 1, and others yelled at him to come back. Two of them decided to force him back. One was called obstinate, and the other flexible. They soon caught up with him. Then the man said to them, "Neighbors, why have you come?" To which they replied, "To convince you to come back." But he said to them, "By no means. You live in the city of destruction, where I was born. And I know for sure that sooner or later, dying there, they will sink deeper than the grave to a place that will burn with fire and brimstone. Leave me, neighbors, and what's more, come with me." What, said stubborn, will we leave our friends and comforts? Matthew 19 verse 22. Yes, he said, Christian, for that was his name, because everything you would give up is little compared to what I am looking to enjoy. Second letter to the Corinthians chapter 4 verse 18. And if they accompany me, and remain firm, they will enjoy the same as I do, because there is plenty for everyone. Luke chapter 15 verse 17. Come with me, and check that I am telling the truth. What things are you looking for, that you leave the whole world to find them? Luke chapter 14 verse 33. I am looking for an inheritance that is incorruptible, pure and does not fade. First letter of Peter chapter 1 verse 4. It is reserved in heaven and safe there, to be given in due time to those who earnestly seek it. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 16. If you want, read this in my book. Away with your book. Will you come back with us or not? No, never, he said. Christian, because I have already put my hand to the plow. Luke chapter 9 verse 26. Then he said flexible. If what the good Christian says is true, the things in whose search are better than ours, my heart will be inclined to accompany him. Yet another fool said, stubborn. It's just that. Stubborn, neighbor, I'm beginning to understand. I am determined to go with this good man and trust him, said flexible. Addressing Christian, he continued saying, do you know the way to this yearned for place? A man called Evangelista has pointed me to a narrow door ahead, and there they will give us directions on the way. Come on then, good neighbor. Come on. And they both left together. I go back to my place, he said, obstinate. I am not going to listen to such a mistaken and fanciful gentleman. When obstinate had withdrawn, Christian and flexible took their way across the plain, conversing thus. Come, neighbor, Christian, since there are only the two of us left, tell me more about how things are, and how to enjoy them when we arrive. Christian replied, there is an eternal kingdom, and eternal life will be given to us, but that we will dwell forever in that kingdom. Isaiah chapter 65 verse 17. John chapter 10 verses 27 to 29. Well said. And what else? We will be given crowns of glory and resplendent garments like the sun in the firmament. Matthew chapter 13 verse 43. Second letter to Timothy chapter 4 verse 8. Apocalypse chapter 3 verse 4. This is beautiful, and what else? There will be no more crying or pain, because the Lord of the kingdom will wipe away every tear from our eyes. Isaiah chapter 25 verse 8. Apocalypse chapter 7 verses 16 and 17, and chapter 21 verse 4. Well, my good friend, I am very glad to hear these things. Come on, let's pick up the pace. But, Christian said, I cannot go as fast as I would like, because of this load that I carry on my shoulders. Chapter 2. In Search of the Savior. The Swamp of Mistrust. Now, when they finished talking, they were approaching a swampy swamp that was in the middle of the plain, and both of them, because they were not paying attention, fell into the mire. The name of the swamp was Distrust. There, then, they wallowed for some time and were covered in mud because they did not see the stone steps in the middle, and Christian, because of the load he was carrying, began to sink into the mud. Then he said flexible, Oh, Christian. And now what will we do? I really don't know, he replied. With this, Flexible began to lose patience, and said to his partner, Is this the happiness you told me about? If we were so unlucky at the beginning, what can we expect from now until the end of our journey? If I get out of this alive, I'll let you enjoy that country alone. Making some desperate efforts, he managed to get out of the swamp. On the side that was close to his house, there he went and, Christian, did not see him again. So, Christian was left to fend for himself in the swamp of mistrust. He kept fighting to reach the farthest edge from his house and closest to the narrow door. He was able to get there, but not out of the swamp because of the load he was carrying on his back. But I saw, in my dream, a man whose name is Help arrive, who asked him what he was doing there. Sir, Christian told him, a man called Evangelist directed me towards that door, so that I might escape the wrath to come, and when I was on my way, I fell here. Then, Help said to him, But why didn't you look for the steps? Fear seized me in such a way that I took the shortest path and fell into this swamp. Give me your hand. He gave it to him, and Help took him to the mainland, ordering him to continue on his way. Psalm 40 verse 2. But Christian approached him and asked him, Lord, since this is the path from the city of destruction to that gate, couldn't this path be fixed so that the poor travelers can pass through here more safely? This swamp, said Help, is caused by the many fears and doubts that settle here. It has swallowed at least 20,000 cars full of sound instructions. It is a place that cannot be fixed. It is the descent through which the dirt that is part of living in sin is continuously added, and for this reason it is called the swamp of mistrust. For when sin becomes aware of its lost condition, many discouraging fears arise in its soul, and they congregate and end up in this place, and that is the reason why this ground is in such bad condition. The advice of the Lord, worldly knowledge. Already walking alone, Christian saw a man approaching across the plain, and shortly after they met. That man was called Worldly Knowledge, who lived in the city of Carnal Management, a very large population, not far from the city where Christian came from. This man, upon meeting Christian, remembered what he had heard about him, since the departure of Christian from the city of destruction had had a great impact, not only in the city itself, but also in other places. Hi, friend. Where are you going so loaded? Loaded, by the way. And I think that more loaded than any other unhappy person has ever been. You ask me where I'm going. I am going to that narrow door ahead, because there, I have been told, They will teach me how to free me from this burden. Do you have a wife and children? Yes, but this burden weighs me down so much that I don't enjoy them as before, and it's as if I didn't have them. First letter to the Corinthians 7 verse 29. Who commanded you to continue on this path to get rid of your burden? A man who seemed very important and honorable to me. He is called, as I remember, evangelist. Don't take his advice. There is no path in this world more dangerous and problematic than the one he has indicated to you, and you will see it if you follow his advice. You have already had some experience, as I see, because you carry mud from the swamp of distrust, but that swamp is only the beginning of the sufferings that await those who walk on this path. Listen to me, I am older than you. It is likely that you will encounter dangers, nakedness, hunger, the sword, lions, dragons, darkness, and even death. These things are real, having been confirmed by the testimony of many. Why should a man so foolishly ruin himself by listening to a stranger? I can indicate how to obtain what you long for without the dangers that you will encounter on this path. Yes, and the solution is easy. Also, I must add, that instead of those dangers, you will find safety, friendship, and contentment. Sir, please explain me more. Well, in that village further on, whose name is Morality, lives a gentleman called Legality, a man of very good reputation and able to relieve those who bear burdens like yours. I know that he has been very successful and has even been able to cure those who have lost their reason because of his burdens. His house is less than a mile from here, and if he is not at home, he has a son, a very attentive young man called Politeness, who can help you as much as the old man himself. There, I say, you can find relief. And if it's okay with you, you could send for your wife and children to come to that village. There are empty houses there, and you can rent one cheaply. Their life is cheap, and you will live with honest and worthy neighbors. Therefore, you should visit Legality, and his son, Urbanity, and they will help you, said the worldly knowing Lord. Hearing this, Christian felt indecisive but soon reasoned. If what this gentleman says is true, I should follow his advice, and he asked, Sir, which is the way to that good man's house? Can you see that high hill ahead? The hill is called Mount Sinai. Yes, I see it. You have to walk along the side of that hill, and the first house you come to is his. Cristiano then left his path to go to the house of Mr. Legality, and ask for help, but when he got close to the hill it seemed so high, and the part on the side of the road so steep, that he was afraid to continue forward, lest he that the rock fell on his head. Therefore, he stopped without knowing what to do. Besides, now his load seemed heavier than before. Flames of fire also came out of the hill, and Christian was afraid of being burned. Exodus chapter 19 verses 16 to 18. He began to sweat and tremble with fear. Exodus chapter 12 verse 21. He began to regret having followed the advice of the Lord, worldly knowledge. At that precise moment, he saw Evangelist approaching, and when he saw him he blushed with shame. Then, Evangelist got even closer to him, and looking at him with disgust, began to reason with him. Help from Evangelist. What are you doing here, Christian? Christian, not knowing what to answer, he remained silent. So, he continued, Evangelist. Aren't you the man I found crying outside the walls of the city of destruction? Yes, sir. How is it, then, that you have strayed so soon? Because now you're out of the way. It turns out that as soon as I got past the swamp of mistrust, I met a gentleman who convinced me that in the next village I could find a man who would relieve me of my burden. What a man! His demeanor was that of a gentleman, and he spoke to me so much that he convinced me, and here I am. What did he say? He asked me if I had family, and I said yes. But, I said, I am so burdened with this weight on my back that I cannot enjoy it as before. He advised me to hasten to take off my load, and he showed me a shorter and better way, and without the obstacles that there are in that way that you showed me, sir. And he told me that the path he was indicating would take me to the house of a man who was very skilled at removing loads. I believed him. I left the other path and came to this one. But when I got to this place, and saw how things were, I was afraid. I do not know what to do now. Stop a bit. Listen to the words of God. He said, Evangelist, but the just shall live by faith. And if he draws back, he will not please my soul. Hebrews chapter 10 verse 38. Christian, therefore, he stood trembling. Then, Evangelist said to him, See that you do not reject the one who speaks. For if those who rejected the one who warned them on earth did not escape, much less we, if we reject the one who warned from heaven. Hebrews chapter 12 verse 25. You have begun to reject the advice of the Most High, and to turn back from the path of peace, almost to your perdition. Then, Christian fell almost dead at his feet, exclaiming, Woe is me, I am lost. But, Evangelist, seeing him like this, took him by the hand, saying, All sin and blasphemy will be forgiven men. Do not be an unbeliever, but a believer. Matthew chapter 12 verse 31, John chapter 20 verse 26. At this, Christian perked up a little, and stood up trembling, as he had done before in the presence of Evangelist. Then, Evangelist continued saying, The man with whom you met is such a worldly knowledge, and is rightly called that, because he only knows the doctrine of this world. First letter of John chapter 4 verse 5, for whose reason always attends the church of the town. Morality, partly because he loves that doctrine because it avoids the need to believe in the atoning death of Christ. Galatians chapter 6 verse 12. Because it is carnal in nature, it seeks to pervert my ways, even though these are the right ones. Now, there are 3 things in this man's advice that you should hate. First, the one who has taken you off the right path. Second, his effort to make you hate the cross. Third, the fact that led you down the path that leads to death. He continued by saying, The person to whom you were sent to seek relief, whose name is legality, is the son of the slave who is now in slavery with her children. Galatians chapter 4 verses 22 to 27, and is, by mystery, this Mount Sinai that you have feared will fall on your head. Now, if she and her children are in bondage, how do you think she can free you from your burden? No one has ever been relieved by him, nor ever will be. Romans chapter 3 verse 20, Galatians chapter 2 verse 16. Therefore, this gentleman, worldly knowledge, is an impostor, and his son, urbanity, despite his irresistible looks, is nothing more than a hypocrite, who cannot help you. Believe me, everything you've heard about those dissolutes is nothing more than a plan to turn you away from salvation by diverting you from the path I put you on. Hebrews chapter 12 verses 18 through 25. Now, Christian began to curse the moment he had encountered worldly knowledge, calling himself a fool 1,000 times for following his advice. He also felt very ashamed to think that the arguments of that gentleman which arose from the flesh, could have prevailed over him, so much so that he had left the right path. This done, he turned to Evangelist, saying, "Sir, what do you think? Is there still hope? May I now turn and go to the narrow gate?" Evangelista answered him, "Your sin is very great. However, he who is at the door will receive you, because he has goodwill towards everyone. Just be careful not to go astray again, lest you perish on the way when the Lord is angry." Psalm 2 chapter verse 12. Cristiano knocks on the narrow door guarded by goodwill. With this, Christian began to walk at a good pace, without speaking to anyone. He was going like one who walks on forbidden ground, not believing himself safe until he reached the path that he had left on the advice of worldly knowledge. So, after some time Christian came to the door on which it was written, "Knock and it will be opened to you." Matthew chapter 7 verse 7. So he knocked several times saying, "Will I be allowed in?" At last a serious person called Goodwill came to the door and asked who was there, where he came from and what he wanted. "I am a poor overwhelmed sinner. I come from the city of destruction, but I am going to Mount Zion. I want to know if he will let me in." "Yes, I will leave it, with all my heart," he replied. And saying this, goodwill, he opened the door. Ezekiel chapter 33 verse 11, second letter of Peter chapter 3 verse 9. And when Christian was entering, Goodwill gave him a tug. "What does this mean?" asked Christian. The other answered, "A short distance from this gate there is a strong castle, of which Beelzebub is the captain. He and his people shoot arrows at those who come to this door in case they can kill them before they are inside." Then Christian said, "I am glad and I tremble." As soon as he was inside, the man at the door asked him who had directed him to that place. "Evangelist told me to come and knock, as I did, and he told me that you, sir, would tell me what he should do. You have before you an open door that no one can close," he said. Goodwill, Revelation chapter 3 verse 8. "But how come you came alone? None of my neighbors saw their danger as I saw mine. But did none follow you to persuade you to come back?" "Yes, both stubborn and flexible. But when they saw that they couldn't convince me, stubborn left angrily, although flexible accompanied me for a while until we reached the swamp of mistrust, into which, suddenly, we both fell. It was there that my flexible neighbor got discouraged, and did not want to continue." Luke chapter 8 verse 13. "And then he went his way and I went mine, he after, obstinate, and I towards this door. Alas, poor man," he said, "Goodwill is heavenly glory of so little value to him that he does not consider it worth running some dangers to obtain it. It is true that he returned to his house, but I also deviated from the path to go to the door, being persuaded by the carnal arguments of such worldly knowledge. I really don't know what would have become of me there if I hadn't had a happy meeting with Evangelista, while I was pondering depressed, but it was by the mercy of God that he approached me again, otherwise he would not have been able to get here. Look forward. See that narrow path? Well, that's the way you have to go. It was opened by the patriarchs, prophets, Christ and his apostles. It is straight as a rule. This is the path you have to take." Matthew chapter 7 verses 13 and 14. Then I saw in my dream that Christian asked him if he could not relieve him of his burden, since he was still carrying that weight, and he could not find a way to remove it without help. "As for your load," Be content to carry it until you reach a place where it will fall off by itself." Having said this, Christian girded his loins and prepared for the road. Goodwill told him that a short distance from the door he would arrive at the interpreter's house, and that he should call there to be taught excellent things. With this, Christian said goodbye of Goodwill, who wished him a good trip and the company of the Lord. The house of interpreter. Cristiano continued on his way until he reached the interpreter house, where he called several times. Finally someone answered, and asked him who he was. "Sir," he said, "Christian, I am a traveler who has come from the city of destruction and I am on my way to Mount Zion. The man who is the porter at the entrance gate to this road told me that if I passed through here, you would teach me excellent things, which would be beneficial for my trip." Interpreter invited him to pass while saying, "Come in, I'll show you what will be profitable for you." She took him by the hand and led him to a very large room full of dust, because it had never been swept. After having examined it for a while, Interpreter called a man to sweep it away. As soon as he began to sweep, the dust rose so much that Christian almost suffocated. Then, Interpreter asked a maid who was nearby, "Bring water and sprinkle the room." This done, it was swept away without a problem. "What does this mean?" Christian asked. Interpreter replied, "This room represents the heart of the man who was never sanctified by the sweet grace of the gospel. Dust is his original sin and his inner corruption that has totally contaminated him. The one who began to sweep at the beginning is the law, but the one who brought the water and sprinkled the room is the gospel. As you saw, as soon as the first one began to sweep, the dust rose so much that it was impossible to clean the room, and you were about to suffocate. So also the law, instead of cleansing the heart of sin, gives it life. It gives more strength and increases it in the soul, because the law exposes sin and prohibits it, without being able to appease it." Romans chapter 5 verse 20, and chapter 7 verse 9. First letter to the Corinthians chapter 15 verse 26. He went on to say, "And just as you saw that the maid sprinkled the room with water, and thus made it easier to sweep it, so also when the gospel enters the heart with its sweet and precious influences, it overcomes sin and subdues it so that the soul is left clean through faith, and therefore fit for the King of glory to dwell in it." John chapter 15 verse 3, Acts of the Apostles chapter 15 verse 9, Romans chapter 16 verses 25 and 26, Ephesians chapter 5 verse 26. "I also saw in my dream that Interpreter took Christian again by the hand, and took him to a pleasant place, where there was a magnificent and beautiful palace, the sight of which delighted Christian very much, and on whose roofs he also saw some people dressed in gold were walking by. Then he asked, 'Can we come in?' Then, Interpreter led him to the gate of the palace, where he saw a crowd eager to enter, but not daring to do so. A short distance away there was also a man sitting at a table, not far from the door, and he had a book and an inkwell to record the name of everyone who entered. He also saw that the door was guarded by armed men, determined to do as much damage as possible to those who tried to enter. Now, Christian was somewhat confused. Finally, when everyone had started to withdraw, for fear of the armed men, he saw the prompter approaching, a man who seemed very strong, who said to him, "Sir, write down my name." This done, he drew his sword, put a helmet on his head, and rushing to the gate charged the armed men, who resisted with deadly fury, but that one, without being discouraged, continued attacking and beating, wounding many and receiving several wounds himself. Finally he managed to make his way through everyone and, sword in hand, he entered the palace. Acts of the Apostles chapter 14 verse 22. Those who were inside and were walking on the roof received him saying, "Come in, come in. Glory you will achieve." So he went in and was dressed like them. Then, Christian smiled and said, "I think I understand what that means. Let me go my way." "No, stay until I have taught you more things," the interpreter replied. He took Christian by the hand again and led him to a very dark room, where there was an iron cage and a man locked in it. His name was Regressed, and he looked very sad. He was sitting with his head bowed, his hands folded, and he sighed as if his heart was breaking. The man said, "He was a prosperous and flourishing believer in my eyes and in the eyes of others. I thought I qualified for the heavenly city, and it gave me joy to think that I would be there." Luke chapter 8 verse 13. "Fine, but what are you now?" asked Christian. "I am a man plunged into despair, which has me trapped, like in this iron cage. And I can't get out." "No, I can't." "But how did you end up in this?" "As neglecting myself, ceasing to be vigilant and sober, giving free rein to my passions, sinning against the light of the world and the goodness of God." "What did you do all this for?" "To enjoy the pleasures and profits of this world. I set out to have a lot of fun, but now each one of those things corrodes and eats me like a burning worm." Then said interpreter to Christian, "Do not forget the sufferings of this man, and may they always serve as a warning to you." Dear listening friend, on behalf of the Christian Polyglot team, we greet you and we are pleased that you enjoy this channel created and designed for you, where you can listen to the adaptations of the best Christian titles in your language. Books written by renowned authors in the Christian field and inspired by the Word of God. We encourage you to join us and enjoy this new audiobook series entitled The Pilgrim's Progress, written by Pastor John Bunyan, author of this and other famous titles. John Bunyan, born in Elstow, Bedfordshire, England, in the year 1628, and died in London, in the year 1688. He was a British Baptist preacher. Although John Bunyan conceived of his work primarily as a vehicle to express the religious ideas of Puritanism, the truth is that the clarity of his prose and the references to everyday life made him a model for later British literature. This famous story of one man's journey through life in search of salvation remains one of the most entertaining and brilliant allegories of faith ever written. This most important work of English literature is today considered the best explanatory allegory of theology and Puritan thought. The book is deeply steeped in Scripture, as Bunyan was a committed and persistent Bible student. Next week we invite you to follow us with new chapters of this series entitled, The Pilgrim's Progress. And if you liked this video and the channel, we encourage you to support us to grow by giving, like, and subscribing so that we can continue working to bring you the best content. Until next week, God bless you.